Is education important at this time? But equally derived from that is, can education be effective within a pandemic? Can we deliver the same quality of education as we'd expect? Will students have fallen behind? And that they're a keeper. And putting it more bluntly, I'm sure parents sometimes I know have expressed to me, is it all worth it? All of the effort that they're putting in at home and the effort that teachers are putting in, is it all worth it? So for the first time in generations, parents are thrust into a very different role, and outstanding schools have had to adapt quickly. There's a blend of that home and school, the boundaries are now blurred, and we're definitely embarking on a very new era of education. So today, what we propose to do is to try and unpack some of those questions into a broader context and also within BSB. So let me start off with some introductions. My name is John Maguire. I'm the Executive Head at the British School of Bahrain. I will introduce Mrs. Julianne Gilbert, who is the Head of Infant School at BSB. Mr. Rob Howe, who is the Head of Junior School at BSB. Mr. Wayne Ridgway, who's the Head of Senior School. And Mrs. Judith Lyons, who is our Head of Admissions. And I'll be calling on those as our panel to provide their input and their feedback. The structure of this question and answer panel is going to be split into two parts. Part one, we're going to look back over the pandemic and what we have done well and what lessons we've learned as an outstanding school. And then follow that up with questions and answers from the floor, so to speak. And then we will also look back, move on to part two, where we will look forward, what we have learned and where we see education moving in the short term. And again, we'll answer questions and answers, hopefully from based on that topic. I will call on each of the panelists to provide a brief summary, and then reflecting on those questions and how, in particular at this time, it has affected different ages of children. And then I thank all of those of you who have already submitted questions. So we will select the questions and get through as many of those as we can related to those two topics. And should any questions come up during the time which are related to those topics, feel free to enter them into the chat and somebody will monitor that, and Mrs. Lyons will be able to interject with any questions which are in the chat that we should raise. But equally, if you do have questions about any other topic, please come to one of our open days and ask us any question about the school or about our procedures. Speak to the school directly. We have a great admissions team and they'll be happy to answer any questions. They'll be happy to put you through to speak to any one of us to hear more about the school or to answer any questions you may have. Most importantly, if you're able to come on a tour, we can talk about the school we love so much until we're blue in the face, but ultimately what makes the school are the students in it, the happiness, and you only get a sense of that by actually walking through the corridor. So do book yourself on a tour. So if I may, I will start with part one, where we are looking back over the pandemic. What have we done well and what have we, the lessons that we've learned? So at this time last year, schools within Bahrain and the world were thrust into this unique situation, which we now find ourselves in. There's a variety of responses from schools, and it's fair to say that some schools have struggled with the challenge that we've all had to face. There was also a different rate of response. Some schools responded very quickly, able to set things up, while others are probably still grappling with those challenges. And it's fair to say that in every school and every home, parents are questioning the provision and the learning of all children, and that's not unique to any school. It's a very natural reaction to unprecedented situation. Are we doing it right? Is it worth it? Are we actually moving ahead? And that's really the question that we've been facing for the last 12 months. And I'm sure you've certainly asked it at some point over the last 12 months. But perhaps I can, before we move on to hear from each of the panelists, perhaps I can bookend the discussions, putting it in a broader, more global context. Today, 23rd of March, actually the World Summit on Education is sitting for 3 days, and they're hearing from Professor John Hattie. 2 weeks ago, he actually published a report which he will present today at that World Summit. Some of you may have heard of John Hattie, a global expert on pupil attainment and the factors and variables which control pupil attainment. And parents will be maybe familiar with his 2008 publication, which is called Visible Learning. A lot of what is discussed in the media, in the press at the moment, we would describe as a deficit narrative. And that's a natural assumption. Children have been disrupted regularly, and therefore that disruption must mean they're currently at a deficit to where they would be normally. But the research coming out from John Hattie has actually said that that's probably inaccurate. The disruption doesn't necessarily mean a lack of education. And based on his research, he's saying that during a time of pandemic, children have actually made as much, if not more, progress than they were expected. And certainly, if we look at countries such as Australia or New Zealand that we would consider slightly more out of the pandemic, not virus-free, of course, but in states of Victoria, in Australia and Christchurch, there's certainly been increased levels of attainment achieved during the pandemic and during that disruption to teaching. So that deficit narrative doesn't always carry the weight, and certainly what the research is showing. Equally, it comes down to, and for us more at BSB, we would discuss, well, what is it actually that you want out of education? Education is more than just academics, and that's certainly the things that we've learnt at the moment. Yes, we prioritized the academics and we pushed forward.
It's not an issue. They do the exact same job.
For us, it's about developing the core values. It's about developing excellence, responsibility, individuality, and there have been great opportunities for students to actually develop those values during the pandemic. There have also been opportunities to develop their independence, their resilience, and we've seen big technological advances. The situation has encouraged teachers to release the responsibility of learning to the students, and that's actually led to them making rapid progress, not just in academics, but also in their own personal skills. We have seen rapid changes in pedagogy as a necessity, and all outstanding schools have. But also there's other topics which we might touch on later about the importance of assessment has been increased, but not necessarily in that formal manner. So I think that really probably just gives an overview of the global situation, research around what's actually happened during the pandemic. But let me hand over to start off with infants and Mrs. Gilbert.
Thank you. Nice to see everybody there today. I would say the most important thing that we've learned during this time was absolutely how important it is for a child to be seen and to be heard by other people as well as their own family. How good it is for their well-being to have a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. And even the classes of children who've chosen to learn completely remotely, and you see the connection of the children catching each other's eye and having a little joke on screen, it is quite phenomenal. That's one of the most important things, I would say. We've learned how important it is to nurture and to cultivate these relationships between children, when normally young children, they build relationships by doing things together. Little boys of 3 years old don't do much small talk. It's more about, let's build something in the sandpit together or play with the Lego and create something together. So we've had to find ways for them to connect with each other, even though they're sitting in socially distanced places in school. make up little mirrored dances where they're catching someone else's eye. Somebody plays a little game and you'll find there's a ripple around the class as that connection happens. We've had to find different ways to make the children connect. We've learned that we've had to be incredibly adaptable and to be flexible and to keep moving with the children, to respond with what works and what doesn't work. I think young children the world over, there needs to be an element of fun to engage them in the first instance. A lot of variety, a lot of fun, enough time for activity and movement when you're socially distanced and there isn't outside play, enough time for a take 5 or another 5-minute break, doing some sort of dance routine, that kind of thing. We've also acknowledged the importance of that live teaching, that connection between the teacher and the child in the moment. Originally, we started providing videos and activities on a blog, but very quickly we realized that children who were going to be learning at home needed to have those live sessions with their peers and with their teacher as well. One thing I also think we've learned, and this is particularly with remote learners, is not to really use the word assessment. Teachers assess children all the time in the classroom to see exactly where they are and work out their next steps. We did find online, the moment the word assessment came up, there was a little bit of panic. And actually, assessment comes from the word assessere, which simply means to sit beside. And all it was for the teacher sitting with the child to see exactly where they are, to see what their next steps are.
Thank you, Mrs. Gilbert.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting to hear. And perhaps we'll move on to the juniors. So years 3 to 6, Key Stage 1. Mr. Howe, lessons that you, looking back over the pandemic, how have you found things? What are the lessons you've learned at Key Stage 1? Key Stage 2, I should say.
I think the biggest lesson, Mr. Aguirre and everyone, is not to underestimate young people. But when we were catapulted into remote learning almost exactly a year ago, and since then we've been through various phases of blended and remote school, the group of people who have coped with that with complete calmness and aplomb are the youngsters themselves. They have been an example to us as we've been jumping about, trying to get everything right and improve everything and to worry about them and what are they making of it all. They have done fantastically well. They've accepted everything that's happened and adapted to it. Throughout all these changes, they've got on. In the junior school, particularly in years 5 and 6, but to a large extent in years 3 and 4, the bring your own device procedure has proved more successful than I would have ever dared hope. Children arrive at school each day during blended learning with their device all charged up. They don't lose it, they don't drop it, which were the things I was most worried about in the early days, and they're able to connect, to learn, to manage their own educational web space and show us all a thing or two. The other thing that's come out of all of this so far is the overarching sense of team spirit and belonging that everyone feels, that we're all in this together and we're all making not only the best of it, but an extremely good job of it. You know, the tragedy of the pandemic doesn't have much to recommend it, but one good thing is the sort of removal of perhaps a creeping sense of everyone being a separate individual, a separate customer, if you like, of a school, who has a sort of a one-to-one relationship between their isolated self and the school. Rather, there's a strong sense now that's always been there, but is stronger still, of a family, a BSB extended family, with everyone in that family doing what they can for their own and everyone else's benefit. And that includes examples of learning remotely on certain days during blended school, so that creates space in the room for others to have a day in school. the one-to-one model might tempt us to keep a place open and not use it every day, but the all-inclusive model helps us to see everyone's needs and us all working together to help them. And I think the third thing, as I think my 3 minutes must be almost up now, is the children's enthusiasm and zest for learning. Not even the most powerful pandemic can extinguish that. And at BSB, we've been able to facilitate learning through our blended program, which I do believe is second to none. And that, of course, is resourced by our highly experienced and properly qualified teachers who, along with the children, have adapted, have improved, and are providing that all-important, as Mrs. Gilbert said, live contact every lesson with the children in school and with those who are learning remotely and keeping learning going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Very interesting. I fully agree with all the points you've raised there. Mr. Ridgway, for seniors, so for years 7 to 13, I think you've probably had a very different experience to other age groups. What are the things that you've learned or looked back over the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McGuire. Yeah, absolutely right. There have been some differences in terms of the experience of our students, the lessons that we've learned, and some of the approaches that we've taken, but there have also been some similarities. And one of the things Mr. Howe said there was about those that have coped best through the pandemic, which has been the young people themselves. And that's certainly applied in seniors as well. Our students have been incredibly resilient. They've been able to cope with the work that's been given to them, the standard expected, and they haven't let their own expectations and standards drop. But what we did learn early on was that we could actually support them in being able to cope even better. One of the key things that we've taken from the last year has been to be able to develop the quality and the depth of learning in the students. And we very quickly realized that providing lots and lots of worksheets as a method of replacing the teaching time that would have happened in the initial weeks or so of the pandemic, it became very clear that that wasn't actually the most effective way for students to make progress. We actually slowed down the curriculum and were able to spend longer discussing things and allowing students that independence to go off and research various aspects of the topics that they were learning. And despite taking longer on those aspects, we haven't found that they've fallen behind. We've still been able to cover that content because by developing a deeper understanding of a particular topic, it makes it much easier when you actually move on to the next thing. And so the students then grasp that next one much quicker. So we've been able to develop the curriculum in that way to make sure that we still cover everything. And the other aspect that has been very similar has been the continuity and the routine that live interaction has brought. It's very clear to us that those students who have been online with us, that have worked with their teachers, that have asked questions and really engaged in their learning and taken an interest and developed that love of learning are the ones that have been most successful. In terms of the things that we've noticed that have been different, has been, again, that word assessment. In senior school, there are public examinations, there is a sense that it has to be high pressure, high stakes testing. And we've actually been able to develop and utilize some of the softer approaches to assessment that are more common lower down the school, to be able to develop different skills in the students. So rather than knowledge-based answers, we've been able to look at students being able to apply their knowledge to a new scenario and develop those skills of application, skills of analysis as well, to again really extend that deeper level of knowledge. And finally, we've been able to spend a lot longer focused on well-being in the students. So our Support 360 program has very much focused on the students having an outlet online in a variety of means to be able to discuss how they're feeling, what they're coping with, what they're struggling with. And what we found there is that by having that outlet, the students have been able to be better focused when they actually get back to their lessons because they feel listened to, they're happy, and if they're happy, they're able to be more engaged and more focused in their learning.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting to hear, and I'm sure we'll pick up on a few of those points in the second part. Mrs. Lyons, I believe that we have questions relating to that topic. Perhaps you can lead us through and we can pick on a panelist to answer a different question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire and the respective heads of schools. For the next 10 minutes, we will now be answering some questions that parents have provided us with on how the provision has changed and lessons we have learned. Please feel free to type any questions in the chat room. I've already had some questions come through, so we'll just start with those ones. The first one is for Mr. Maguire and Mrs. Gilbert. What are the main values needed to be looked at more for each age group?
Shall I start, Ms. Gilbert? Or
yes, you start.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have our, for us, we have our core values of excellence, responsibility, and individuality. That's, I think, across the whole spectrum of 3 to 18. We are one school. We have 82 different nationalities, and therefore within that, there's a huge number of values that develop. I would say that we are, if I speak at one end, and perhaps Ms. Gilbert can talk about at the other end. So where do I often think about where do we want the student to be at the end when they leave the school? We want them to be well-rounded, we want them to be academically successful, we want them to be able to access the best university courses in the world, but equally we want to give them the personal skills and the moral character to make themselves successful in whatever career they go into. But that doesn't happen overnight. And equally, the provision that develops that in the senior school wouldn't be appropriate in the infant schools. Perhaps I'll hand back to you, Ms. Gilbert, and you can perhaps say where we start. If that's where we end, where do we try and start with them?
I would say at the very beginning, the values. I saw something at Bilad al-Qadim at Bahrain Fort that was inscribed on a piece of rock from 3,000 years BC. And these 3 words were respect, hospitality, welcome. And that was very much, that's still the spirit of Bahrain all these years later on. And I would say if we can teach the children a sense of respect, make them appreciate the diversity, respect their peers, build relationships, and of course, welcome. You know, if a child would come into the classroom, if somebody new comes, it's come and join us. It's very much not a cliquey school, really a very inclusive school, all sorts of diverse backgrounds. And our aim is for the students to respect their teachers, to respect learning, but also to be comfortable and happy in their own skins. So I'd say that's where we start, probably, John.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire and Mrs. Gilbert. The next question I'll direct towards Mr. Maguire again and Mr. Howe this time. In this virtual world, what is BSB doing to improve the social and extracurricular skills of the children?
If you'd like to start, Mr. Howe.
Yes, with pleasure. Okay, so interaction and children communicating with one another and with their teachers, of course, has been part and parcel of education ever since education began. And that doesn't change when the mode of communication has to change for reasons of safety during a situation like we have now. So although we don't at the moment have a school clubs program running during blended school for various reasons, we're following, of course, the ministry guidelines which keep clubs on hold for the moment. We do have an Elements program which is open to the whole of Bahrain as well as just BSB, that I'm sure our admin team will tell you a lot more about. But certainly within Key Stage 2, within the school day, children stay connected throughout the day to their peers, obviously in the classroom because they're there, and to their remote peers at home. So during their break times, they can still interact in a less formal way. They're supervised at a slightly greater distance, by our learning support assistants during those break times. We very much look forward to getting back into the normal full extracurricular program of sports and arts and cerebral pastimes as soon as safety rules permit us to do so. We did try, as a little experimental foray last school year, having fully remote clubs, and that worked best as a complementary add-on to the learning program, where we're not they were points of contact for people to come in on a Google Classroom page at various different times. And several of those have continued, so that people with a common interest can share ideas, although it's not in real time. So, not absolutely ideal extracurricular provision, but the priority has to be, number one, safety, number two, keeping learning going. And those things we've been able to achieve uninterrupted.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howe. Would you like to add anything, Mr. Maguire?
No, I think Mr. Howe, as always, has covered it very well. I think it would say when we are the subjects who are probably most associated with that we were harder to replicate during a virtual learning, those of PE, those of drama, those of art and music. Actually, they were perhaps the most innovative of all of our subjects. And our PE designed an entire website which was used all around the world. Our drama, still to this day, is incredibly innovative. But equally, those are the subjects that have really pulled the students back to the campus. They're the ones that they're really enjoying, coming back into PE, coming back into music, and coming back into the drama. So I think extracurricular is one of our key pillars. The performing arts, sport, and academics are given equal weight here. But I'm conscious of time, so perhaps we can push on with a couple more questions, Mrs. Lyons.
Yes, I'll just move on to the next question. That's for you, actually, Mr. Maguire. What are the precautionary measures your school has implemented to safeguard the children against COVID?
Sure. And I think a very similar question has just appeared in the chat, so I can cover both at once. It took a lot of planning. I would say it's probably 3 or 4 months in the making, starting from last May, and in preparation. Our protocols go above and beyond anything else in the country, and we're renowned for how strict and safe our campus is, and it has been a good blueprint for other schools, not just within the UK, within Bahrain, but also schools in the UK and all around the world have actually been utilising what we've done, and within the Inspired group that message has spread. We are very careful about how we ensure that any illness doesn't come onto campus through use of technology in terms of a daily health check, temperature checking and recording. Equally, we're very careful of how we protect the students when they are on campus. And those systems, so with regular cleaning, social distancing, whilst it's only children up to the age 12 and above, we've actually gone beyond that and asked any children aged 8 and above to wear face masks. We've kept them in their isolated bubbles. We've made sure that there's good social distancing, and no school is risk-free. Any school that claims that it is completely safe from COVID is clearly not prepared well enough. No school is risk-free, but I think we have mitigated and managed the risk better than any other school that I've certainly come across. And so we seem to be in a very safe environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire. The next question is for Mr. Ridgway. Kids in the same class would have different strengths and weaknesses, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on how this is addressed in a classroom.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, every classroom is different, every subject is different, but we always pitch our lessons to the very highest ability through our high expectations of all students, and then our teachers will vary their support for students in meeting those objectives, whether that is through some one-to-one support, whether that's through some adaptive worksheets, or whether that's through working with specific groups of students where they will have various roles within those groups to be able to contribute to the outcome and to that task. So yeah, there's a whole range of different strategies that are employed. And without going into much further detail, as I said, it does vary quite largely from subject to subject. Whilst we're online and with our students as well, our teachers are making great use of the Zoom breakout room function, where they're able to put students in small groups, in large groups, or even in individual rooms to complete their work, where the teacher can drop in and out of those rooms and they can provide the various levels of support that will be required.
Mrs.
Thank
Lyons,
you
I
very
think
much.
in time, we'll move on to part 2, and I'm sure there are some other questions. So if we move on to looking forward, what are the lessons learned during this time, and where are we moving to next? And I'll be very brief because I know my colleagues are at the forefront of this, but certainly the pandemic has changed not just our model of education, but also the model of how every aspect of every school has changed. I would classify it as in 3 ways. One is change. We've had to change to the current situation. Some of those changes we were unknown about before, and we will have to retain them moving forward. Some of the things that's happened in the pandemic is acceleration. Like Mr. Howe said, we had always planned to roll out bringing your own devices into the junior school, and all that this pandemic has done is accelerate those plans and to great effect. And actually, we were always slightly cautious about whether we could move even further down, and yet we're now given the confidence that we can. And the third thing I would say is innovation, and the staff here and the students and the parents as well have been incredibly innovative, and they're the things that we want to take forward. I would definitely say from an academic point of view that we're looking at that skills-based competencies, not just academics, but also how they learn as well as what they learn. Pedagogy and the way that teachers teach is definitely changing, much less focus on the teacher, much more facilitating individual, independent and collaborative learning. As Mr. Ridgway's talked about assessment, and I'm sure he'll talk about it a bit more, that's certainly something. But when we say assessment, it isn't just about formal assessment, it's different styles of assessment. Overall as well, our communications completely changed. Gone are the days of the one end of term newsletter to parents. Parents are time poor, they want information quite readily, quite justifiably, and we've adapted our communication to make sure that we are regular with our communication, but also quite succinct, to the point, and accessible. And I hope that will certainly change moving forward, and even reviewing things like parents' evenings. And if I dare say, 2 years ago, the idea of a webinar like this would have taken months in the planning and been incredibly daunting. And yet now it seems to be very commonplace. And I think things like that will certainly retain. But equally, looking forward, there's some key parts about a school such as ours that are crucial, that we won't ever want to lose, and that we want to maintain moving forward. That family feel, the sense of joy, the sense of happiness, and a lot of that really only comes by seeing someone face to face, having those face to face meetings, seeing the laughter and the smiles on people's faces, and building that relationship with the children and with their parents and becoming part of that family. And that's certainly things that we're looking forward to coming back. So I would say that that's really a summary of where we're moving, things that we've learned, but equally things that we're looking forward to reintroducing. Let me hand over to Mrs. Gilbert for infants, and perhaps answering that question of, how will education in the infant school change looking forward based on the future?
I would agree with you, John, that the increased use of technology for communication has been phenomenally useful and impactful on the school this year. As we're part of the Inspired group of schools, at the forefront of that is the Reggio Emilia approach to teaching of the early years. So we've had almost fortnightly meetings with breakout rooms and webinars and discussions with teachers of children the same age from all over the world, where really interesting things have come up. For example, I was in a bit of a panic before the campus opened. I was thinking, gosh, there's no way we're going to be able to get these year ones to go into the classrooms on their own without their mummy taking them in first thing in the morning. And a very nice lady in Japan said, well, actually, in Japan, 2 4-year-olds, as long as they've got a friend with them, they actually navigate the tube system in Japan on their way to school without an adult. So things like that have been really helpful. At the moment, there's a lot under discussion in the groups about raising bilingual and trilingual children, which is something that we aim for all of our children. I would say there is an increased empathy and understanding in many cases between teachers and parents. I feel teachers who've been working online from their own homes have really been observed throughout the day by parents. They've opened themselves to it. I think that is something that we really need to nurture. And yeah, I would say the collaboration, the sharing of best practice. I think it's been a bit like a wartime situation. When things are difficult, human nature bounces back. People do club together, really for the greater good.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Howe, perhaps the same question, what are you looking forward to? What are the next steps, things that you'll take away from this situation and embed in the future?
Well, education, of course, is always developing, and any school that's seriously interested in remaining the best school, not only in the region but beyond, has to develop or perish. No one can ever stand still. And of course, the current situation has given us many a stimulus and a bit of extra oomph to adapt, to grow, and to develop in ways that can go on when the world returns to normal. So improvements that we will see following the pandemic specific to BSB. Like the Apollo program with its more earthbound spin-offs, we're going to see post-COVID improvements in educational provision, such as greater use of bring your own device. And before anybody says, oh gosh, more use of technology, the children will become square-eyed. The opportunities that the technology opens up to extend learning beyond the confines of the school day and the physical confines of the classroom are too good to miss. And modern devices with their even backlit screens and very high refresh rates are much, much easier on the eyes than the flickering old CRT monitors we remember from back in the 1980s when computers first started to take off. So bring your own device, and technology is definitely here to stay, and we've bashed through a few glass ceilings of what we thought were the limits of children's capabilities. Thanks to necessity, they've shown us what they can actually do. And a reduced paper environment, of course, is good for the whole world and something that will definitely be retained going forward. Students developing their own web portfolios in the same way that many adults, when they're searching on the job market, now refer potential employers to their website rather than sending them a separate CV. Young people can do the same thing. They can build up a learning portfolio based on what they've done in the various years of their education. And it's actually there, it's visible where they can see it, future generations can see it. The next generation will see what their mums and dads did when they were at school, rather than the dusty old box of exercise books up in the attic that no one ever has time to go upstairs and look at. Google Classroom, of course, will continue to mirror and to record what's going on in school every day, as it did before COVID. We had Google Classroom in those days, but we've used it a lot more and in many different ways since the COVID situation began. So the schedule for the day, the content of each lesson, it will all be there, and a place for children to drop their assignments also and pick up feedback from their teachers. So if a student needed to be absent from school for a few days, perhaps because they weren't very well, or because there was some visa issue with traveling, or whatever it might be, then learning can still continue uninterrupted. Okay. Parent-teacher meetings and conferences can all be done without the need to come and compete for a parking space and sit on an uncomfortable plastic chair for long periods of time. Video conferencing, like we're doing now, is the way to go. We can connect from our home, our office, wherever we happen to be, and recorded webinars make scheduling better as well. If we're busy at the scheduled time, we can catch up later on. So I think those are the main ways that we're going to see lasting improvements after the world gets back to a new normal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really interesting, Mr. and a lot to work on, but some exciting projects there. Mr. Ridgway, for the senior school, for the older students, things that you'll take away, taking forward, next steps?
Yeah, I think obviously listening to both the juniors and the infants there, you can really feel the sense that there's going to be a lot more technology focus moving forwards, but we can also feel that from in front of us as well. So we were actually part of a pilot process for Pearson online exams for this year until they were unfortunately cancelled. And so online assessment is going to be a big part of the future. And it's been accelerated by the pandemic. And as soon as next summer, we will expect to have some online assessments. And as you can hear, the skills that the students are going to be building up on their journey through the school and through the different key stages is going to mean that they are going to be better prepared for those assessments. And our own internal assessment methods will have to align with those external ones. And so the skills that we're going to be focusing on are going to be very different to what we would expect as a traditional one. One of the really key ones there that is potentially going to change and possibly even disappear over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be handwriting. That's going to become typing skills and typing speed and typing accuracy. And that's going to be a real key to success, particularly in those essay-based subjects. The other thing that we've learned and we're going to take forwards from the pandemic as well has been the opportunity that it's given us to enrich our students beyond the curriculum. We recently launched our Beyond BSB program, which has started with a series of weekly lectures from teachers, from experts in the field from around the world, from officials from within the Bahrain government to people from universities around the world. And they've offered expertise in various fields and topics that are relevant to future university aspirations and career aspirations as well. And the aim of that is to, again, really develop that greater sense of desire to learn more and to avoid the confines and constraints that a curriculum can sometimes place on a student, particularly in those examination years. And what we've found is that the students have been really motivated by that. They've really enjoyed the variety of lectures that we've offered. And our next steps now are to expand that even further and to utilize this new online method of delivery to enhance other aspects of our university preparation program.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We probably have about 8 or 9 minutes, Mrs. Lyons. So let me hand over to you to lead us through any questions parents may have.
Thank you very much again to our Executive Headmaster, Mr. Maguire, and our heads of school for their valuable insights. So we just have as Mr. Maguire said, we have a few minutes left. We'll now be answering the final set of questions from our parents on what improvements we will see in global education following the pandemic and specific to BSB. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat room. We'll just start with some questions we've received. I'll just direct this to Mr. Maguire. Is BSB working on improving the communication channels between teachers and parents quickly and efficiently?
Yes, I think to reiterate what I said before, that's definitely a high priority for us, and we're working. It's a regular topic with both our parent advisory group and a regular topic discussed at our senior leadership, trying to look at not only improving clarity, improving ease, and making things as simple for parents as they can, making sure that they gone are the days where they'll get to the end of the term and receive just one report. They want to know that their child is doing well, making rapid progress, and how the next steps. And they will also want to know what's happening within the school. They are an integral part of the school. We don't want to keep them at arm's length. And so being part of that community means regular communications with them. So communications with parents and with students is a high priority in our next school development plan, which starts in September.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire. This question, I think, would be for you as well. When will the school resume normal school timing and daily routines as they used to be before COVID-19?
Well, it's looking into that crystal ball. I think as opening now, and unlike nearly every other school in Bahrain and most, we are offering 5 days a week for infants and 4 days a week for most students in juniors and seniors, which is a good step. We're hoping that regulations will be lifted as the term progresses next term, and then come September, once regulations are lifted, we'll be back into normal timings and daily routines. The difficulty is with any pandemic, I know this time last year when we first went into lockdown, it was said that we're just to be 3 weeks of schools being closed, and then 3 months later we were still teaching virtually. So I don't, particularly as this is recorded, and I know it will come back and haunt me, I don't want to put a date on it, but as soon as the regulations, we're doing our part to make sure that the campus is as safe as possible. We're doing our part within the community to make sure that the pandemic is under control. When the pandemics are then fully under control and the regulations are relaxed, we will be back into school in earnest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maguire. I'll direct this question to Mr. Howe. Through the observation of the children, would teachers be able and willing to guide the parents to direct their children to suitable extracurricular activities that suit the children's abilities and skills through the clubs in the school?
As soon as we can, yes. And yes, we do direct children towards particular clubs that we feel would suit them, give them an opportunity to showcase, develop and further their skills and their interests. And one of the highest priorities we have when we're able to restart the clubs program is to do exactly that. The timeline is as soon as possible, and we can't put a calendar date on it just at the moment, as Mr. Maguire has said, but the sooner the better in our view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Howe. This is a question for Mr. Ridgway. How do you support high or low academic achievers, as some children may be exceptionally bright or some may have learning difficulties?
I think that's the question I answered previously.
Oh, sorry, did I repeat the same question? Sorry, they're just coming up in a different order in the chat. Let me see, there's another question there. I think a PE has been mentioned before, but this is maybe for Mr. Ridgway. Does the school offer physical education classes?
So despite the restrictions and the safety measures, we have been able to offer physical education classes. We've been able to do that through the selection of activities and the way in which we've delivered them. So we've, in the first term, we offered racket sports, which are individual sports, and the students had their own piece of equipment that they sanitized before and after use, and they were able to do that. We're currently doing an athletics program, which again is a very individual type activity. And the students are currently recording their personal bests to contribute towards our online sports day. So yeah, PE has very much continued as best we can. We haven't covered the full range of activities within school campus, but the online website has given students additional activities that they can do that we haven't been able to cover in school.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ridgway. I'll ask this question to Mr. Maguire. What are some of the school's greatest accomplishments and some of the biggest challenges the school faces?
Wow, that's a question that you want me to answer in under 30 seconds. Some of the, I think for us, the school is 25 years old. It has been on a journey over those 25 years. But for me, one of the greatest accomplishments that the school has achieved is irrespective of changing its location, irrespective of changing its ownership, irrespective of changing its size, it's always retained that villa school feel, happiness, joy at the center of everything we do, the children smiling, the staff smiling, and the happy parents. And I think that's one of its greatest achievements, because it might not sound a brilliant, an amazing achievement, but it's having inspected schools all around the world, you can feel it as soon as you walk in a school, and it's easily lost and very hard to regain. And I think the fact that we are such a happy school and prioritise people's happiness whilst maintaining all of our success in other areas, sports, as Mr. Ridgway's talked about, music, performing arts, and academics, that itself is a real achievement. The challenges facing moving forward will be to maintain that ethos, to develop and make sure that our students not only go on to the best universities in the world, but go into the best careers in the world and are successful within those careers. The Beyond BSB program, which Mr. Ridgway talks about, is definitely designed to set them up with the business skills they need, the interpersonal skills they need, and the values that they need to make sure that they are success. Because we don't ever want people to feel like they've left BSB. They were a class of BSB. They will always be a member of BSB. They just become from studying here to studying somewhere else. And that whole community feel is important to us. And certainly the challenges facing us moving forward, I would put down of actually the progress we've made this year has been huge. It's about prioritization, making sure that students and making sure that some of the innovation that we've done over the past year is embedded in best practice and we can retain it, making sure that we're increasingly efficient in our communication and making sure that we retain our ethos. That probably leads us on to my concluding remarks, if I may, Ms. Lyons. So really, I just want to thank everyone for their time today. Thank you very much to our panelists for giving up their time and giving us an insight into their aspects of the school. To reiterate that research I started with about John Hattie, that yes, we agree there has been a disruption to teaching, but there's not been a disruption to learning. And that's been our key aim during this time, to maintain a safe learning educational environment for everybody. Teaching has changed rapidly, so has learning. Learning about skills, learning about competencies. It's not just about knowledge, but equally all the things moving around that are crucial. Moving forward, we'll maintain all of those improvements to the school. Next steps for you as parents, whether current parents or prospective parents, do come and talk to us. Take that next step. Come and talk to us about any of the topics you've heard about today. I apologise if we haven't answered the question that you submitted. Do come and ask it to us either in person or on the phone. We'll happily answer. If you're prospective parents, do come and join us for either a tour or just to find out more about the school. And if you're a current parent, do come and join us for a coffee. And it's always nice to see parents in the admin building. But probably with just 1 minute to go, that concludes the end of our first BSB panel discussion. And I hope you feel it's been useful and interesting. The recording will be available if you do want to share it, or if you do want to touch back on any of the points. And we'll certainly let you know when our next panel discussion comes up. So I wish you a very good day and to maintain your safety at this time. Take care.